The grand hall was filled with bright lights, restless voices, and curious eyes. Leaders from across the world had gathered for an important technology summit. It was a place where every word spoken carried weight, and every gesture was watched by thousands. Among the many respected guests stood Arvind Krishna, a man of quiet strength and intelligence. He had worked his entire life with discipline and vision, yet that evening he faced something unexpected, something that would test not only his dignity, but also the patience of his heart. As Arvind walked onto the stage, the sound of scattered whispers began to rise. Some people looked at him with doubt, some with careless amusement. In moments where respect should have been given, small voices of mockery slipped into the air. A few laughed at his accent, a few questioned his background, and some even murmured that he did not belong in such a grand gathering. Humiliation, sharp and cold, tried to cover him like a shadow. The weight of those unkind eyes pressed heavily on his spirit. Arvind felt his chest tighten. He had stood before many audiences in his life, but this moment was different. The ridicule was not hidden. It was sharp and clear. His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone. For a moment, his voice struggled to escape as though the judgment of the hall had tied it in chains. He wanted to speak, to share his vision, but silence threatened to win. His heart whispered, "Stay strong. Do not let them see your pain." But the echo of laughter made the struggle harder. In the first row, Sundar Pichai sat calmly, his eyes focused not on the mocking crowd, but on Arvind himself. He saw the storm, building inside his friend, the storm of humiliation and doubt. Sundar knew that moments like these were not just about words or speeches. They were about the essence of human respect. In that moment, Sundar rose from his seat, and with a calm voice, he asked the audience to listen. The hall slowly grew quiet. His presence carried a gentle authority that demanded attention without force. Sundar spoke softly, but every word reached every corner of the room. He reminded the audience that true greatness is not in mocking others, but in understanding them. He said, "The strength of a leader is not measured by how loud he speaks, but by the honesty in his vision." The silence that followed his words was heavy but respectful. People who had laughed moments before now looked down, ashamed of their thoughtless behavior. Humiliation that once filled the hall began to fade, replaced slowly by reflection. Arvind stood still, watching Sundar. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a reminder that kindness has the power to heal wounds that even courage sometimes cannot. His trembling hands grew steady. His voice, once locked in fear, now found its way out. He began to speak, not with anger, not with pride, but with simple honesty. He shared his story of growing up with little, of fighting through doubt, of building himself step by step through patience and resilience. His words carried no arrogance, only truth. The audience listened with quiet attention. Eyes that had once judged now softened. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, realizing their mistake. In the glow of Sundar's kindness and Arvind's resilience, the hall was no longer filled with laughter or whispers of doubt. It was filled with silence, the kind of silence that comes when people are humbled, when they are reminded of respect. For Arvind, that moment was not just about delivering a speech. It was about standing tall in the face of humiliation, about discovering that kindness could transform even the harshest moments into something powerful. For Sundar, it was about reminding the world that respect is not earned through fear, but through compassion. This was only the beginning of a story that would touch many lives, a story of humility, resilience, and the quiet strength that turns pain into inspiration. The applause that followed Arvind's speech was not just polite. It was real. It carried weight. It carried respect. People who had been ready to dismiss him now looked at him with new eyes. Yet even in that moment of relief, Arvind felt a quiet heaviness inside. Respect had returned, yes, but the sting of humiliation still lingered like a shadow. He knew that wounds of dignity take longer to heal, and that even one moment of cruelty can leave scars on a man's spirit. As the audience settled down, Sundar returned to his seat. He glanced at Arvind, and their eyes met. No words were spoken, but Arvind felt gratitude rise within him. He wanted to thank Sundar, yet something inside whispered that gratitude alone was not enough. There was something deeper to be understood, something about kindness, about why Sundar had stood for him when so many had remained silent. After the session ended, the crowd spilled into the large hallways of the convention center. Chandeliers glittered above, cameras flashed, and conversations buzzed all around. Some came forward to shake Arvind's hand, offering apologies for their earlier behavior. Their words were soft, but Arvind could still sense the thin layer of guilt behind their smiles. He accepted their apologies with grace, because he knew holding bitterness would only chain him to the pain of that moment. But not everyone was ready to change. In a corner of the hall, a small group of men whispered among themselves. They spoke not with respect, but with jealousy. One of them muttered, "He only gained sympathy because Sundar defended him. Without Sundar, no one would have cared for his words." Another nodded. "People forget too easily. Humiliation does not disappear so quickly." Their eyes carried envy, as if they were more troubled by Arvind's rise than by their own failure to show kindness. Arvind overheard those whispers as he passed by, and though he did not stop, his heart felt heavy again. He wondered why people choose cruelty when compassion costs nothing. He wondered why some prefer to bring others down rather than lift them up. Questions filled his mind, but instead of letting them weaken him, he chose to let them sharpen his spirit. He told himself, "A storm may shake the tree, but it cannot break the roots if they are deep." Later that evening, Sundar found Arvind alone on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The cool breeze carried with it a silence that felt honest. Sundar stepped beside him and spoke gently. "You did well today. Your story touched them." Arvind turned, his voice quiet. "I could not have spoken without your kindness. When I felt small, you gave me strength." Sundar shook his head softly. "Strength was already inside you. I only reminded you to use it." Those words stayed in Arvind's heart. He realized that kindness is not about giving someone something they do not have. It is about reminding them of what they already carry within. Humiliation had tried to silence him, but kindness had shown him his own hidden courage. He began to understand that the true test of a man is not in avoiding humiliation, but in rising above it with dignity intact. Yet the story did not end there. The summit was still to continue for 2 more days, and many voices would rise on that stage. Arvind knew the same hall that mocked him once could test him again. He also knew that jealousy does not fade easily. Shadows of resentment still followed him quietly, waiting for another chance to strike. But deep within, he felt a seed of resilience grow stronger. He was no longer only defending his pride. He was standing for every person who had ever faced humiliation and needed the courage to answer it with patience. That night, as Arvind closed his eyes, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I will speak again, and this time I will not wait for kindness to save me. I will carry it inside me." Next morning, the hall was even more crowded. Reporters filled the front rows, cameras pointed toward the stage, and leaders whispered among themselves. The air was heavy with expectation. Everyone remembered what had happened the day before, and many wondered if Arvind Krishna would rise, again with the same strength, or if the whispers of humiliation would return to break him. Arvind walked toward the stage slowly, each step measured and calm. Inside his heart, there was still a trace of fear. But beside that fear, there was something stronger. He carried the memory of Sundar's kindness, not as a shield, but as a light. The moment he touched the microphone, he remembered his promise. From the night before, this time he would not wait for anyone to defend him. This time, his own voice would carry him through. He began by telling a story from his childhood. He spoke about the days when he studied by candlelight because electricity often failed in his small town. He described how he walked miles to reach school, sometimes without shoes, but always with hope in his heart. He said, "Those who laugh at me today should know, laughter is not new to me. I've heard it before, in the streets, in the classrooms, and even in my own mind. But I have also learned that laughter fades while effort remains." The hall grew silent. Every word touched the listeners, not because it was polished, but because it was real. People leaned forward, no longer out of curiosity, but out of respect. His voice was not loud, but it carried honesty, and honesty has a sound that no one can ignore. Yet in the crowd, there were still restless hearts. One man, known for his sharp tongue, rose suddenly during the speech. With a smirk, he said, "It is easy to speak about struggle, Arvind, but is struggle enough to lead? Sympathy may win hearts, but it does not build nations." His words echoed through the hall, cutting through the silence like a blade. Some gasped, some shifted in their seats, waiting for Arvind's reaction. For a moment, Arvind's chest tightened. This was another test, another attempt to turn respect back into humiliation. But instead of anger, a calm rose inside him. He looked directly at the man and answered, "You are right. Sympathy alone does not build nations. But respect does. When we respect those who struggle, we open the doors for their effort to grow. When we laugh at them, we close those doors forever." The hall remained still. The man who had spoken sat down, his smirk gone. His eyes lowered. Sundar watched from the front row, his lips forming a small, quiet smile. He knew Arvind had found his strength, not from defense, but from his own voice. After the speech ended, the audience rose to their feet. Applause filled the hall again, but this time it was not just for his words. It was for his resilience. People began to see Arvind not as a man who had been humiliated, but as a man who had faced humiliation and risen higher because of it. Later, in a private corner of the venue, Sundar approached Arvind. He placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Today you did not need me to stand for you. Today you stood for yourself." Arvind looked at him and replied, "Yesterday your kindness saved me. Today it reminded me of my own strength. I will carry this lesson for the rest of my life." But even as respect filled the air, not everyone celebrated his victory. Behind closed doors, those who envied him still plotted quietly. They could not accept that humiliation had failed. They could not accept that kindness had turned into power. And so, in their hearts, they prepared another challenge, one that would test Arvind in ways he had never imagined. The evening after Arvind's powerful speech, the atmosphere in the city buzzed with conversation. Newspapers began to print his words. Online platforms spread clips of his calm responses, and people across the world discussed how a man once humiliated had now risen with dignity. But while admiration grew outside, inside the summit's walls, a storm of envy gathered quietly. In a dimly lit meeting room, a few voices spoke in hushed tones. These were men who had influence, but not patience. They had pride, but not humility. One of them leaned forward and whispered, "Yesterday he was almost broken. Today, he stands like a hero. If this continues, people will forget us and remember only him." Another agreed, his voice bitter. "Respect is a dangerous thing when it is not given to us. We must remind him of his place." They began to plan, not with open arguments, but with small acts meant to weaken him. They decided to spread doubts about his achievements, to twist his story, and to paint his resilience as mere luck. Their plan was not loud. It was quiet, like poison slowly spreading in water. The next day, Arvind entered the hall again, unaware of the whispers moving against him. As he walked to his seat, he noticed a shift in the crowd. Some faces looked colder, some smiles appeared thinner, and some voices carried hidden questions. When the host announced Arvind's name for a panel discussion, a few muttered remarks floated in the air. He speaks well, but is he truly a leader? Maybe Sundar made him look stronger than he is. These words were not shouted, but they reached Arvind like distant echoes. During the panel, the moderator asked a sharp question. Mr. Krishna, many people admire your story of resilience, but some say sympathy, not strength, brought you this respect. What do you say to that? The words were designed to pierce, to bring back the sting of humiliation. The audience waited, some with curiosity, some with hidden satisfaction, hoping to see him stumble again. Arvind paused. For a heartbeat, the old fear tried to rise again. But then he remembered Sundar's words. Strength was already inside him. He lifted his eyes and spoke with steady calm. Sympathy may touch hearts for a moment, but it does not last. Respect grows only when actions prove it. My life has not been easy, but my effort has been honest. If people respect me, it is not because of my pain, but because of the lessons I carried through it. His words settled over the room like gentle rain. Some nodded slowly, some looked down, embarrassed. Sundar, sitting nearby, watched closely. He knew that every time Arvind answered with honesty, he grew stronger, not weaker. But the men who had plotted were not satisfied. One leaned to another and said, "He speaks with patience, but patience cannot protect him forever. We must find a way to break his voice completely." Their envy grew darker, feeding on each moment of respect that Arvind received. Later that night, Arvind walked alone outside the venue. The streets were quiet, the lights soft against the dark sky. He thought about the question asked and about the doubt that still followed him. His heart ached, but he refused to let bitterness enter. Instead, he whispered to himself, "I cannot control the envy of others, but I can control my response. I will not fight envy with anger. I will face it with truth." Sundar found him again, standing under the streetlight. He said gently, "You are learning something many never understand. Power is not in silence or in shouting. It is in staying true when others try to twist your path." Arvind nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "Then I will stay true, no matter how many storms they bring." The third day of the summit arrived with heavier air. The hall, once filled with respect and quiet admiration, now carried a different kind of tension. Whispers had grown louder overnight. Articles appeared online questioning Arvind's credibility, suggesting that his journey was exaggerated, and some even hinted that he was riding on Sundar's influence rather than his own strength. These doubts were not accidents. They were carefully planted seeds by the same men who envied his rise. As Arvind prepared for another session, he could feel the weight of those rumors pressing against him. When he entered the hall, he noticed the way some people looked at him, not with open respect, but with narrowed eyes, as if they were waiting to see him fall. Sundar, sitting calmly as always, noticed the change too. He leaned closer and whispered, "Do not let noise decide your truth. Remember who you are." Arvind nodded, carrying those words inside like armor. The session began, and the host introduced a debate format. Arvind was paired against a speaker who was not only skilled in words, but also sharp in his attacks. This was no coincidence. The envious men had ensured that Arvind would be placed under fire. As soon as the debate started, the speaker struck hard. "Mr. Krishna," he said with a mocking tone, "your story is touching, but is it not simply a story? Many leaders have built empires, while you speak only of struggle. Tell us, is your greatest achievement survival, or do you have something more to show? The hall buzzed with uneasy murmurs. The challenge was clear. Arvind felt the sting of the words, but he breathed slowly before answering. His voice calm, he replied, "Survival is not weakness. It is the foundation on which every success is built. Those who walk through fire may carry scars, but they also carry wisdom. I do not stand here to claim greatness. I stand here to remind us that respect for struggle is respect for the strength that comes after it." Some in the hall clapped softly, but the challenger pressed again. "And yet, without Sundar's defense, would you even be here today? Perhaps kindness made you shine, not your own strength." The words cut deeper, and all eyes turned to Arvind. Even Sundar remained silent, waiting to see how Arvind would face this test alone. A hush fell over the hall. Arvind stood straight, his hands steady, his eyes firm. He answered, "Yes, Sundar's kindness lifted me when I was falling. But strength is not about never needing help. Strength is about rising even when you have fallen. If kindness gave me a chance, it was my choice to use it. And today, I stand not as a man who was saved, but as a man who refused to stay broken." The silence that followed was powerful. The challenger's smirk faded. The hall, once filled with doubt, now carried a quiet respect again. People whispered to each other, not with envy, but with admiration. Sundar's eyes softened with pride, though he did not speak. He knew Arvind had just taken a step into his own light, but in the shadows of the hall, the envious men clenched their fists. Their plan had failed again. They had tried to twist kindness into weakness, but Arvind had turned it into strength. One of them muttered with frustration, "He grows stronger every time we attack. We must find a way to break him completely, in front of everyone, where even Sundar's calm cannot protect him." That night, as Arvind returned to his room, he felt both the weight of exhaustion and the warmth of resilience. He looked out at the city lights and whispered, "Every attack teaches me more. Every doubt makes my truth clearer. I will not fear their plots. I will answer them with honesty until honesty itself silences them." The final day of the summit arrived, and with it came a sense of both excitement and unease. The grand hall was filled to its limits. Leaders, journalists, students, and business minds all waited for the closing session. It was the most important stage, the one that would be remembered long after the summit ended. Everyone knew that words spoken here would echo far beyond those walls, but in the shadows, the envious group had prepared their most dangerous plan. They could not allow Arvind to leave the summit as a symbol of resilience. They wanted him to walk away humiliated once more. They spread documents across the press tables, filled with half-truths and twisted stories about Arvind's career. They prepared a speaker who would directly accuse him on stage, not with questions, but with insults masked as truth. When Arvind entered the hall, he felt the tension like a heavy storm pressing down on him. Whispers rippled through the crowd as journalists clutched the papers they had been given. Sundar, seated near the stage, sensed the trap immediately. His calm eyes followed Arvind, and for the first time in days, worry touched his face. The session began with speeches from various leaders. Then, the host turned to Arvind. "Mr. Krishna, the world has heard your story, but today new information has come to light. Some claim your achievements are exaggerated and that your success is built not on merit, but on influence. What do you say to these accusations?" The hall erupted with murmurs. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled furiously. The envious men leaned back with satisfaction. This was their moment. They wanted to see Arvind stumble, to see the respect he had earned dissolve in doubt. For a long moment, Arvind stood silent. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was not just a question, it was an attack designed to break him completely. His mind replayed every insult, every doubt, every cruel whisper he had faced. But then, deep within, he heard the quiet echo of Sundar's words. Strength was already inside you. Arvind lifted his eyes, steady and calm. His voice was low but carried across the hall. I will not fight lies with anger. I will not fight envy with insults. My life is an open book. If you believe my achievements are small, then let them be small. If you believe my success is luck, then let it be luck. But I ask you this, if my struggle is not worthy of respect, then what is? Is it wealth that demands respect? Is it power? Or is it the courage to rise again and again when the world tries to push you down? His words struck deep. The hall grew quiet. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of the doubt they had entertained. Others leaned forward, their hearts stirred by the raw honesty in his voice. But the planned challenger rose sharply and said, Words sound noble, Arvind, but respect cannot be begged. If you must explain your worth, perhaps you have none. The insult was sharp, meant to wound. Gasps filled the hall. Before Arvind could respond, Sundar stood. His calm presence commanded silence. He looked directly at the challenger and spoke with quiet strength. Respect is not begged. It is given. And today, every person in this hall has seen Arvind stand with dignity, even when attacked. If you cannot see his worth, it does not mean he has none. It means you have chosen blindness. The hall erupted in applause. The challenger lowered his head, defeated by the weight of Sundar's kindness and truth. The envious men sat frozen, their plan collapsing before their eyes. Arvind turned to Sundar, his eyes moist with gratitude. Yet inside he knew something even greater. He had already won before Sundar spoke. Because he had not let anger lead him, he had chosen dignity. And in choosing dignity, he had shown the world that kindness is stronger than humiliation, and truth is stronger than envy. The hall remained alive with thunderous applause. It was no longer the applause of courtesy, it was the applause of hearts that had been touched, of minds that had been awakened. Arvind Krishna stood in the center of the stage, his shoulders straight, his eyes calm, and his voice steady. The humiliation that once tried to silence him had now turned into the very reason people respected him. What was meant to break him had only revealed his strength. Sundar Pichai watched from the front row, a gentle smile on his face. He did not smile with pride as if he had played the greater role. He smiled with quiet satisfaction, knowing that kindness had done its work. He had not given Arvind strength, he had only reminded him of it. And now, the world saw what Sundar had always seen, a man whose dignity was unshaken, whose resilience was unbreakable. After the session ended, people rushed to Arvind. Journalists asked questions, students sought guidance, leaders offered their hands in respect. Many who had mocked him earlier now bowed their heads with sincerity. Arvind shook each hand with humility, speaking with warmth, never showing bitterness. He did not remind them of their laughter, nor did he point to their doubt. He only reminded them of the lesson that respect cannot live where kindness is absent. Later, as the summit closed, Arvind and Sundar stepped outside together. The evening. Sky stretched wide, painted with soft orange light as the sun began to set. The crowd behind them still murmured with excitement, but for a moment, the two friends walked in silence. Then Arvind spoke softly. Yesterday I thought humiliation was the end, but today I see it was only the beginning. Respect is not built in silence or in applause. It is built in the way we rise after falling. Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder. And you have risen, Arvind. Not because you fought back with anger, but because you chose patience. Not because you demanded respect, but because you showed dignity. That is a strength the world cannot ignore. Arvind looked at the horizon, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and peace. "I once thought kindness was a gift others gave me. Now I see it as something I must carry always, even for those who try to bring me down. Because kindness is not weakness, it is the strongest answer to cruelty." As they walked back, the same hall that had once mocked him now carried his name with honor. The summit ended, but the story did not. His journey was now an example for countless people who faced ridicule, doubt, and humiliation in their own lives. He had shown them that no insult is final, no doubt is permanent, and no humiliation can destroy a heart that holds kindness and truth. The envious men who had plotted against him walked away quietly, defeated not by power, but by something greater. They had wanted to break Arvind in front of the world, but instead they had witnessed the world rise to respect him. Envy had tried to win, but kindness had claimed victory. In the days that followed, Arvind's story spread far beyond the walls of the summit. People spoke of him not as a victim, but as a man who transformed humiliation into inspiration. His words reminded the world that respect is not demanded. It is earned through humility, resilience, and kindness. And Sundar's role in that story became a timeless reminder. Sometimes one calm voice, one kind gesture, is enough to turn an entire hall of doubt into a hall of respect.